star's life from their birth to their death. To start off, are the phases of a star's life? Over here, I have the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. This is a diagram that's used by many astronomers to measure stars in the main sequence. You can see that every single type of stars is listed here, from stars that are supergiants, like the biggest ones, to the main sequence stars like our suns, to the dwarfs, like the white and red dwarfs. So, at the start of a star's life, it is born in something called a stellar nebula, which is the remnants of a powerful supernova explosion, and it has all the necessary materials for star formation. Certain stars are just not big enough to start fusing hydrogen in their core. These stars are called brown dwarfs. The only way that a star can become a star is if it's able to do nuclear fusion in its core and give off more energy than the pressure of gravity from the outside. If they're able to start fusion in their cores, they become stars like our sun in the main sequence. Towards the end of their lives, most stars go into something called a giant phase, where they balloon in size rapidly, and at the very end, they usually explode in a massive supernova, or if they're smaller stars like our sun, they will go to the giant phase, then shrink down to a white dwarf stage. So, what exactly is the life cycle of a star? So, as I said, stars are born in big clouds called stellar nebulas. These are known as the creators of all the stars in the universe. There are two things that the stars can become. It can either become an average star like our sun, which is actually not that big compared to some of the stars in our universe, or it can become an extremely massive star. And the bigger the star is, the hotter and brighter it is. And that's why you can see that stars like our sun shine yellow, whereas stars such as the Pistol star shine white and blue. The average star like our sun will grow into something called a red giant. This is where it will balloon in size rapidly and start fusing heavier elements in its cores. When our sun goes into this stage, it will swallow the orbits of Mercury and Venus. If it's a massive star like Pistol star, it will increase to something called a red or blue supergiant, which is basically the giant phase, but a lot bigger and a lot brighter and more powerful. Stars like our sun will then explode towards the end into a planetary nebula where planets can be made. Whereas stars such as red supergiants will go supernova, and they will explode in some of the brightest explosions in our entire universe. At the end of that, they'll either come out with a neutron star, which is an extremely small and dense spinning ball of neutrons, or a black hole, which is some of the most extreme things in our entire galaxy. Planetary nebula stars will usually end up shrinking down into white dwarfs. If you can see here, the planetary nebula has a white core. That actually is the white dwarf surrounded by all of the cloud of the nebula. So, a star is from their birth to their death. All stars are born in clouds called stellar nebulas. These are the remnants of big supernova explosions like I mentioned earlier. Once a star reaches a sufficient mass, the fusion in the star's core will start, and the star becomes part of the main sequence. After they exhaust all the hydrogen in their core, they begin to stop making energy. Therefore, gravity pushes the star more inwards. Then the core becomes more hot. The helium starts fusing into another heavier element, and it keeps going on where all the helium is fused into a heavier element. Once all of that is done, the star stops generating energy, gravity pushes in, the star's core all of a sudden becomes hotter. It keeps on going until heavier and heavier elements are fused, and once the star starts fusing iron in its core, the fusion of iron doesn't generate any energy whatsoever. So from that point, the star will basically implode on itself and explode, creating all the heavier elements in the entire universe. Based on their size, after the supernova stage, the stars will either become white dwarfs, neutron stars, which are only a few kilometers wide. But think about this, a teaspoon of neutron star would be nearly as heavy as the entire Earth, millions of tons, in a teaspoon of neutron star. If they are even bigger, the star will become a black hole, and they will have something called a singularity, which is a point of infinite gravity. So what are the types of stars? You have the white dwarf star, which is what happens when stars like our sun go to the very end of their lifespans. There are the red giant stars, which is what our sun will become towards the end of its lifespan. There are red supergiant stars and blue giant stars, which when a massive star, such as Pistol star, becomes old, they swell into an even bigger form of star. The yellow dwarf star is basically the smallest type of star that you can have, while still having fusion in its core. There's the red dwarf star, which is barely 100 times more massive than the planet of Jupiter, and is actually the smallest type of star you can have, and is one of the least bright stars. They're also the most common stars in our entire universe. Lastly, you have the brown dwarf stars, which are sad wannabe stars that just didn't get big enough to start fusing hydrogen in their core. If you keep getting more, think about it like this. Jupiter, the planet, is composed of many of the same things that a star is, just in an extremely smaller amount. If you take around 13 to 90 Jupiters and smash them together, you'll basically get a brown dwarf star. And you won't have a proper star because there's no fusion in the core, but it will give off very low amounts of light from the heat that originally came when it was created. So, the giant phase of stars. All stars will go through some form of giant phase in their life unless they're a red dwarf. The size of their giant phase depends on how big the star was in life. Extremely massive stars become blue and white giants, or even supergiants. Stars like our sun become medium-sized red giants, which makes sense because the sun is a medium-sized main sequence star. Once the star goes into this phase, it will most likely swallow the orbits of Mercury and Venus, and we will be very, very dead. If the star is much, much bigger, it becomes something called a hypergiant, which is a star that is hundreds of times larger than our sun and has a surface temperature of almost 25,000 degrees Celsius. Compare that to our sun that has a surface temperature of barely 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This is almost 5 times brighter right at the surface than our sun. However, stars like these explode very early on into their lives because every single second they get rid of most of their mass throughout their solar wind. For example, there is a star, one of the biggest stars in the universe, that gets rid of 230 billion tons of its mass every second from its solar wind. That's how big that star is. Because of things like this, these blue and white hypergiants barely last for a few million years, whereas stars like our sun last for about 10 billion years, and stars like red dwarfs, which go through their fuel very, very slowly and are very small, they can last for trillions of years. This is much longer than the entire universe has even existed up till this point. Stars like these either explode spectacularly or just collapse inward into themselves and become black holes and neutron stars. Over here, I have an example, theoretical, of what a supernova would look like. We don't actually have any supernova pictures that you can look at them and say, yes, this is a supernova. This is an artist's take on what a supernova would look like. So how do stars die? People tend to think that, okay, stars might kind of just fizzle out towards the end of their lifetime, and certain stars do. But most stars, towards the end of their lifetime, all stars expand. Most of them contract afterwards and become white dwarfs like our sun will, but some of them explode in massive explosions such as supernovas and even hypernovas. A hypernova is just a supernova, but from a star that is much, much bigger. If the star is a lot smaller, they become things known as planetary nebulas towards the end of their life, which can help make more stars and eventually collapse into white dwarfs. If the star was extremely massive, like I mentioned, they would expand and then blow up. At this stage, the star would simply become a neutron star or a black hole. So here I'll explain the 3 major phases of a star's life: how they're born, how they live, and how they die. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. And I'll see you next time. Bye!